Welcome to Beyond the Next Chapter. I am your host, Whitney Clark. As many of you know, I love historical fiction. It is one of my absolute favorite genres. So I'm so excited to talk to this author today and talk about this book that is easily one of my favorite books of the year so far. It's called The Amalfi Curse by Sarah Penner. Penner is my latest guest on the podcast, who you're going to hear from in just a moment. You may remember her from her hit debut, The Lost Apothecary. Yes, that was her debut in 2021. So many of us fell in love with that book. It became a New York Times bestseller. So I recently got a chance to talk with Penner about her new book. Take a listen. So tell readers what they can expect in The Amalfi Curse.
Yeah, so the Amalfi Curse comes out April 29th, and it tells the story of Haven. She's a nautical archaeologist, and she is in Positano, the gem of the Amalfi Coast in Italy, and she's investigating a cluster of mysterious shipwrecks. And while she's there, some strange things start happening. Actually, the morning that her first morning there's a multi-million-dollar yacht that goes down right off the coast. As she's sort of going through her quest and her adventure, she starts to suspect that these shipwrecks might be tied to a coven of witches who lived in the region 200 years earlier. So there's a lot of shipwrecks, there's a lot of sunken secrets and forbidden love on the high seas. And early readers have said it's their favorite book of the three, so I'm very excited.
Well, it's definitely one of my favorite books of the year so far. I love historical fiction. I love books that feature strong female characters, and you have so many in this particular book. Let's talk a little bit about nautical archaeology, because to be honest with you, did not know what this was until
Yeah, so nautical archaeology, it's an archaeologist, they unearth and excavate, except their work is not on land, it's in the water. So there are very few schools that actually issue degrees in this field. Texas A&M is one of them, which is where Haven went to school. And I'm a scuba diver. My husband and I have been diving for about 10 years. We've gone diving in lots of wrecks, particularly in the Florida Keys, but I'm not a nautical archaeologist. And so in order to inform myself so that I could write this book the best I could, I actually got 2 different online certifications in nautical archaeology. So I learned a lot about shipwreck excavation and how to safely do that in a way that maintains the integrity of the structure as best you can in those conditions.
Wow. How long did it take you to get those certifications?
Well, there's sort of a do-it-your-own pace. Maybe like 3 or 4 weeks. I did a big batch of them when I was flying around, traveling for one of my other books. So, planes are a good place to get work done like that.
So you've actually gone to see shipwrecks in the Florida Keys, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. What was that like?
Oh my gosh, so cool. So the Florida Keys are riddled with thousands of shipwrecks because it's so shallow there. In the age of sailing, prior to that would have been like the 17, 18, 19, early 1900s, prior to the advent of modern navigational equipment. These mariners, they really didn't know where the reefs were, and they would often run aground just because they were in water that was too shallow. And of course, the Florida Keys are very shallow. So that's why there's so many wrecks down there, and the water is warm, which is great for a scuba diver. I just, don't even need a wetsuit. I just go in a bikini with my big air tank on my back. But it was so fun because for one, you kind of get a sense when you're underwater of the size of these ships. I mean, you're diving right along the hull of them, and you can see how the wildlife have overtaken the wreckage. One of the wrecks we went to was what the diving team kind of described as a lobster graveyard. They all went there to molt, and so there were tens of thousands of lobster shells just kind of along the shipwreck. So a really cool experience to get this, feel for the size of it and the marine life, but then also just sort of see something from history that most people will never have the chance to see.
Yeah. Wow, that is so cool. So this book is dual timeline, which I love a dual timeline, present day, and then also, in the 1800s.
Do you go back and forth between each sort of chapter, writing in
Yes.
different voices?
Yeah, so similar to what readers loved about The Lost Apothecary, which is the back and forth of the present day and historical narratives, I do the same thing with the Amalfi Curse. And that's one of my favorite ways to actually structure a narrative because I get to seed a lot of secrets in the historical narrative that will leave the reader on a cliffhanger. And then only when I'm ready as the author does my present day character kind of uncover the necessary information to reveal what those secrets or facts were. So I kind of liken it to when a TV show cuts to a commercial break. The equivalent to in my books to that is I cut from one narrative to the next. So, I'll cut the scene at the highest tension moment when the reader just can't wait to figure out what's about to happen. And I will fast forward 200 years and put you right back in the present day. So it's information reveal that I have a lot of control over, structuring the narrative that way. But it also, for the reader, gives you two entirely different senses of world building. So you get to see Positano in the early 1800s when it was a very quaint fishing village. It was kind of a very homely place, and learn a little bit about what that was like compared to now. Positano, it's full of influencers and super yachts, and there's a nightclub, and a cave that doesn't kind of get going until about midnight every night. So that is such a vastly different setting and a lot of world building, and I got to do all of that. So that was one of the most fun things about writing this book.
Speaking of Positano, I haven't been there. I've been to Italy a few times, but I've seen, the videos and the photos of all of the crowds. It is just an iconic, gorgeous stretch of land. There's a reason why so many people go there every year. What kind of research did you do in terms of
Yeah.
visiting Italy? Because that's the kind of research I think all of us would also love
I
to
know.
do.
This was, my first two books were set in London, which is one of my favorite cities in the world. But gosh, Positano was a dream. So my husband and I, we went there in 2022. That was my inspiration trip. And then we returned in 2023. And I call that my research trip. So 2022, that was my first time in Italy. We hopped all along the Amalfi Coast and really immersed ourselves in the wine tasting, the cuisine, the fresh seafood and mussels, the limoncello, the views and the vistas and the boat tours, the snorkeling, all of this amazing immersive, deliciousness that is the Amalfi Coast. And then our return trip in 2023, I kind of had a specific task list. We went to an archive in Naples, which is the largest city near the Amalfi Coast and where most people would fly into. So we went to an archive there so I could do some research. We went to a museum. We took a private boat tour to the three islets that are featured in the story. Where the witches of the sea descended from the sirens who lived at these islets. So I sort of had a more specific task list with trip two, but it's been so fun. A lot of the early readers are people who have been to Positano, and they say that's one of their favorite things about the book is the immersive world building and how it feels like they're right back there with a limoncello in their hands.
I haven't been to that part of Italy, but I also felt I was there. So the world
Yeah.
building was great. That's the kind of world building that we love. So you went initially, then went for a research trip. Was there something that you saw when you first went to Italy that made you decide, okay, this is the book that I want to write, or was there something that you heard?
Yeah, so I wanted to write something along the sea. Again, both of my first two books, they take place in London, and totally city oriented, although the River Thames plays a large role in The Lost Apothecary, my debut. But I wanted something set along the ocean. And Positano, I know it's kind of right now it's having a moment. It's a sexy city for people to visit and photograph. And I wanted to take advantage of that a little bit. And while there are some commercial fiction books that have been written that take place in that area, there was nothing that kind of felt like it tied into mystery or witches, and that's my wheelhouse. So that was the story that I built. I was particularly inspired by this abandoned villa on a hilltop on the west side of the village. So a lot of people probably who've been there have pictures of this villa without realizing it. So maybe they can flip through their photos and see if they've got it. But when I saw that abandoned villa, I just knew that is going to be one of the settings of my book. And sure enough, it's where the witches in my story live. So that particular, place definitely inspired me. But the entire book takes place on or next to or underneath the ocean. So that was so much fun, writing the scuba diving scenes, and sort of, I think probably a lot of readers will not have ever been scuba diving and probably never will go. So I really dug into the sensory detail, what it feels like to have a wetsuit on, the pressure in your ears that you have to equalize as you're getting deeper. And I hope that readers love that part.
I did like that part because I don't think I'm as brave as you to learn how to scuba dive.
Uh-huh.
What was it like for you? Like what made you and your husband decide that was a hobby? Because it does involve some training.
Yeah, so funny enough, we got certified when we lived in Kansas, like the single
Oh.
most landlocked state in the United States. But there, to get our open water, like our final test that we had to pass, we went to this huge deep lake in Arkansas. And then since then, of course, we've been diving all over the world, just pretty much in the ocean. We did dive in an aquarium in Las Vegas. That was pretty cool.
Oh, really? Which hotel was that at?
I believe it's Mandalay Bay.
Okay.
And
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
yeah, you have to stay there in order to dive in their aquarium. But we were in chainmail because there were sharks everywhere. It was such a cool experience. But yeah, why did we decide to do that? My husband and I are pretty adventurous, and we live our lives a little bit different than, kind of mainstream. We've chosen not to have kids. We up and left our home state 8 years ago and moved to Florida, knowing absolutely no one here. We've always just kind of lived life on our own terms. And I think doing something sort of adventurous like scuba diving fits the bill for that. And we've had some incredible dives, in Thailand, with it being surrounded by schools of fish, just like you would see a National Geographic movie. Some really incredible memories that we've made.
That's so cool. Speaking of sort of living life, your way, I love your sort of history and how you became a full-time author. I read that you left your day job in 2021. Now you're a full-time author. How were you able to make that leap and make that possible?
Yeah, so my first book, The Lost Apothecary, I wrote in the wee hours of the morning, while working my day job. So I would wake up at 5 a.m. and I would sit down and I would write for 2 hours because I had a dream and I felt the magic of that book. It was almost like something bigger than me was pulling me forward, and I wanted to chase and pursue that. So I would write before work, and the book came out March 2021, but I knew I didn't want to, I'd been in finance for 13 years. I knew that steady paycheck every 2 weeks and all the benefits, medical health benefits, they were important to me. So it was, I didn't want to, be a one-hit wonder with The Lost Apothecary, so to speak. So I waited until I sold my second book, which incidentally was just a couple of weeks after The Lost Apothecary came out. My publisher said, "What do you have next? We're ready to buy it." So when I sold my second book, The London Seance Society, I turned in my resignation letter to my employer, and I've been writing now full-time for just over 4 years. And I speak to a lot of readers, particularly women who are in the corporate workforce or they're raising families. They have these other commitments and pulls on their time and attention. And I just try to remind them that I know what that's like. Even though I don't have kids, I know the corporate grind, and you're going to have to carve out time somewhere. And for me, it was 5 to 7 a.m. that everyone was asleep, husband and dog asleep upstairs. And that was when I could kind of be selfish and pursue my own dreams. So I just actually had a book club before this call with a bunch of women throughout the globe who work for a data science company. And I sort of asked them to think about after the call, like, what is that creative pursuit? It doesn't have to be writing, it can be music, art, language. And what are some little steps that they could experiment and explore and play around with in coming weeks and months to see if there's maybe something fulfilling that they could do with that in their free time, but they first have to figure out when they can carve out time.
Yeah. What I can't believe I'm still trying to like wrap my brain around the fact that The Lost Apothecary was your debut because it was such a good book. Like I would have never like thought that was your debut novel. What did you study in college? Did you take creative writing classes as an adult to sort of get you in that mood of writing creatively?
Right. So my degree at the University of Kansas was finance with concentration in German and international business. And I have all of like 6 English college credits to my name. However, yes, to answer your question, I did take several online creative writing classes. And I talk about this a little bit on my website where I sort of delve into certain parts of my journey. But those classes were great because what I realized, each week we had assignments that were due, and then our classmates and our instructor critiqued it. And what those classes taught me was, number one, can I find time to submit these writing exercises and really make them worthwhile? I mean, I need to sort of create and ideate and develop and revise these pieces of work. And every week that's a time commitment. So I liked it. I was able to find the time. But then most importantly, when I got feedback from my instructor and my fellow classmates, it didn't cripple me. I was open to that feedback. I wanted to make the piece of work or the essay better. And that is vital. This industry requires really thick skin. As soon as your draft is off to your agent and your editor, all you're getting are, please fix this, please fix that. It would be stronger if you did this. It'd be stronger if you did that. So if you can't take that, and really like execute on it and understand that they're trying to help you, if that's going to cripple you, then this business isn't for you. So those classes helped me sort of see, do I even have the right personality type for this industry?
What is your best piece of advice for other women in any industry who might be dealing with that sort of criticism, and how have you let it make you a better writer?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think that we as women, we don't always assume good intent. So, we might think, oh, my agent is saying I need to cut this character or fix this subplot because the book sucks, or I'm a bad writer, or she's upset with me and wants to give me work. That's not the truth. The truth is we should assume good intent. People want to help you make the best product that you can so that by the time your book reaches readers' hands, they're not thinking cut that character or this subplot is terrible, because your team has already identified it and you've already resolved it. So I think for women, no matter what the endeavor is, assume good intent, and that when people do suggest improvements or ideas, they're not criticizing you. They generally, especially if you're surrounding yourself with the right people, they're trying to help you. And then the other thing I would say is be selfish. That is okay to be selfish. We don't have to grind our entire lives for our employer and our children and our spouse and our home and our bills. Like, be selfish. Take that time, cut it out of your schedule to sit down and read a book or go on a trip by yourself or with girlfriends. Like, do things for yourself, because we get one chance at this life, and I'm all about maximizing it and living a life of abundance. But to do that, we do need to be selfish. And selfish, that word has a negative connotation, but it shouldn't. It's important for self-care and mental well-being.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you're right that you feel selfish being selfish, but you got
Yeah.
to do it sometimes. Especially I feel like women who wear so many different hats, whether it's at home or it's at work. What books do you like? Like, what do you have any go-to authors? Like, what are you reading right now? Kind of fill us in on the books that you enjoy.
So from a genre perspective, I love a good historical mystery. I mean, that's kind of what I write. I don't really, I've never really fallen into like the rom-com or high fantasy. Those two aren't really my genres, but I love historicals. So Fiona Davis is one of my favorite authors and a good friend of mine, and we have the same agent. Her last book that came out earlier this year called The Stolen Queen is my favorite of her entire breadth of work. Let's see, I love anything that takes place in kind of an atmospheric setting or a unique setting. I fell in love with historical fiction first through Philippa Gregory. She writes a lot of books that take place in castles, and I'm an Anglophile, so that appealed to me. Ken Follett, Elizabeth Kostova, she wrote The Historian. That's a little bit of historical fiction with elements of magical realism, so that really appealed to me. So those are kind of a few. I actually end up doing a lot of reading to endorse other authors for upcoming titles that are coming out. A really good one that I read recently, there's actually two, Lady Tremaine by Rachel Hockhauser, that comes out next year. That's a reimagining of this evil stepmother in Cinderella and creating a lot of empathy for her experience. I think that book was phenomenal. And then LA Women by Ella Berman, that comes out this year, I think this summer. Totally, it reminded me of like Evelyn Hugo meets, it was just like full of like LA sex, drugs, and opulent parties where everything goes wrong. And that was just like a vibe. That was so fun to read.
I love that. I loved Fiona's book, The Stolen Queen. I actually talked to her on my podcast, and
Great.
The Stolen Queen and your book have been two of my favorites so far this year. I am huge. Historical fiction is totally my jam. You mentioned earlier that like witches are like part of your wheelhouse. When did you first develop an interest in witches, and how has that developed over the years?
You know, it's funny. I didn't begin with an interest in witches, but I think that I've had interest in topics that are adjacent to witches. So, for instance, apothecary type stuff, herbal remedies, essential oils, that type of thing. Back in the 1700s and 1800s, a lot of times women who were interested in those things were accused of witchcraft. And since I'm writing books steeped in history, naturally the characters who are involved in those things, witchcraft kind of surrounds them, whether they claim to practice it or people believe they practice it. The other thing is, when I first wrote The Lost Apothecary, you know, Eliza, the 12-year-old, she had a very small, minor belief in magic. And my editorial team at the time really wanted to expand that. They really liked that. And my editor said, let's kind of amplify the magic in this story. And readers just devoured it. And that sort of unintentionally became a little bit of my brand. History meets magic and mystery. So with book 2, I wanted not to do magic, but to do something else that was slightly speculative. So I went the seance paranormal route. And then here with book 3, I went sort of your most pure witchcraft, I guess you could say, where there's 12 women with power over the sea, and that's via this Italian art of witchcraft that the Italian word for that is stregheria. So it's sort of evolved, but different elements of speculative fiction have always made their way into my stories, and it's kind of my brand now, and I think something that readers expect from a book written by me.
And in your new book, The Amalfi Curse, what are the little nuggets that are really stem from true stories? You know what I mean? Like what parts of the book are real based on what your research has shown you?
Absolutely. So the 3 islets where they're called Legali as a whole. There's a lot of shipwrecks actually there because kind of a turbulent waterway, and a lot of historical mariners and sailors ran aground in that area. And it's also said from a mythological perspective to be where the sirens descended, or I'm sorry, originated. And so the women in my story, they kind of descended from those sirens. And there's all of the shipwrecks that feature in the book, that's steeped in truth. There's not, to my knowledge, a wreck known as the Aquila, which is what my character is after. But a lot of the tumultuous waters, the mentions of piracy and trade routes, all of that is steeped in truth. The Italian art of witchcraft, I mean, people can kind of decide whether they want to believe in that or not, but there is a very strong legacy of witchcraft in Italy. So that was rooted in a lot of the research that I found. A lot of the customs and traditions of fishing villages and sailors and their shanties and their ballads and what they ate and the keeping of the journals and logs, that was all steeped in truth. So there's a lot, I try to keep it as authentic as I can while also delivering on a really engaging story full of love and revenge and a lot of things that I've created for my characters.
I love to read the acknowledgments in a book. That tends to be like one of my favorite parts, especially when I'm done. And it gives you a really good glimpse of what the author was thinking and, of course, who they have to thank. So I have to ask you, you mentioned this in the acknowledgments. What was the best thing you ate while you were doing this research? What recommendations would you have for people who might read this and be like, I'm going to the Amalfi Coast?
Yes. So there's okay, so it's zuppa di cosa, mussels and tomato broth, and the butterscotch panna cotta. So the restaurant, it's this little, it's kind of off the beaten path. I don't even know how we found it, but it's in Positano. It's called Il Grottino Azzurro. So that's all listed in the acknowledgments. But it's funny, my husband and I, we both ordered this bowl of mussels. And they're fresh out there. And, normally he finishes his meal first because he's a guy and he just eats fast. And I don't even think I took a breath eating this bowl of mussels with all of this crusty bread and olive oil on everything. And he looked up and he was like, "Are you serious right now? Like you just ate that whole bowl." And then we shared the panna cotta and I just couldn't even believe that there was anything so good in the whole world. So that meal, I'll never forget it. I have photos of it on my phone and every so often I look back and I just think, wow, what a good meal.
I think that is definitely one of the highlights of being in Italy is the food. I mean, it is just impossible to beat. And on the coast, I think when people think of Italy, they think of pasta, which of course there's a lot of that, but along the coast, there's so much great fresh seafood. So
yeah, seafood and olives. I loved, you wouldn't really know this until you travel there, but as soon as you sit down, in addition to your aperitifs, they bring you a bowl of the most delicious olives you've ever had and these little biscuits to kind of munch on. And it's great, service oriented out there as well to sort of make your patrons happy. And I miss it every day.
Yeah, same. You can write your next book in Italy too. Well, tell my publisher it's going to be on the
coast. Had to get back out there.
Once again, is there anything else you want readers to know about the Amalfi Curse?
Gosh, I've been asked a lot about just sort of what I want readers to take away. And there's one of the main themes throughout the book is this idea of treasure and what treasure is, and more importantly, what treasure isn't, and how the answers to those questions change by person. So like any good fiction book, my story has villains and it has heroes. And certain people think that treasure is family and friends and love and connection. And some people think it's money and treasure and gemstone, like actual treasure and yachts and big houses. And I like to explore that theme. I was raised really humble in a little tiny 2-bedroom log cabin in the heart of Kansas. And my parents raised me with good values, and humility was one of them. And Haven in this book, she's grieving the recent loss of her dad, who she was very close to. And I lost my dad more than 10 years ago. So I was able to sort of relay some of what he taught me into this book and kind of weave it through Haven's grief process as well. And the last line of the book, I won't spoil it, but it really drills home on the theme and sort of my beliefs about what matters. So I think that that's been, I've been glad to see that early readers have taken that away, and it's resonated with them as well.
I loved the last line. We won't tell, like we said, we won't know. This is a spoiler-free podcast, so we try not to
Right.
reveal, a ton to give things
Yeah.
away. But I loved the last line. I loved the message. Love books with strong female characters, which there are many in this, which was so fun to read. So Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. And if anyone's looking where to find me, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and I've got a website that I update all the time with the latest and greatest events.
Cool. Thank you so much.